Universal Center for Renovation presents historical and biblical Israelites. This video is strictly for educational purposes and commentary. This video is a biblical and secular historical literature, so enjoy. The whitewashing of the Jew of Rome. The Jew of Rome, book by Wagner. The novel is a historical fiction centered on Flavius Josephus, the Hebrew historian of the 1st century. It follows him during the period when he had become established in Rome, dealing with the tensions of being a Roman and an Israelite. Wikipedia, Wagner, born July 7th, 1884, died December 21st, 1958, was a German Jewish novelist and playwright, a prominent figure in the literary world of Weimar Germany. He influenced contemporaries, including playwright Bertolt Brecht. Wagner's Judaism and fierce criticism of the Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis, years before it assumed power, ensured that he would be a target of government-sponsored persecution after Adolf Hitler's appointment as Chancellor of Germany in January 1933. Following a brief period of internment in France and a harrowing escape from continental Europe, he found asylum in the United States, where he died in 1958. The Jew of Rome is volume 2 in Wagner's Josephus trilogy, a series of historical novels based on the life of Flavius Josephus, the 1st century Hebrew historian. The Josephus trilogy, about Flavius Josephus, beginning in the year 60 in Rome. The first volume, Der Jüdischer Krieg, Josephus, 1932. The second volume, Der Sohn, The Jew of Rome, 1935. The third volume, Der Tag wird kommen, Das gelobte Land, The Day Will Come, Josephus and the Emperor, 1942. Context: 1935, Germany. Adolf Hitler was Chancellor and head of state, consolidating power. The Nuremberg Laws, September 1935, stripped Jews of citizenship, framing them as a race apart from Aryans. Nazi propaganda portrayed ancient Jews as foreigners, Asiatic, and non-European, dangerous to their myth of a pure Aryan lineage. The book and image. Wagner, author of Der Jüdischer Krieg, The Jew of Rome, was himself a German Jewish intellectual, critical of fascism and anti-Semitism. The cover art shows Josephus not as Europeanized, but as a man with earthy brown skin, Afro-Semitic Mediterranean features: short, cropped, dark hair. In other words, clearly non-Aryan. The choice is striking. In an era when publishers often whiten or Europeanized Jewish figures, this cover instead insisted on historical Semitic authenticity. The cover as allegory, showing Josephus with a deep brown Semitic or Shemitic complexion, was deliberate. It rejected Nazi racial myths. It insisted that Jews were Semitic, Mediterranean, ancient, not Aryan, not to be assimilated into Hitler's fantasy. Josephus' contemplative pose mirrors Wagner himself, a Jew writing to preserve history, knowing empire could burn it away. The hidden message. In 1935 Germany, the book is more than a novel. It is a coded warning. Just as Josephus wrote during the fall of Jerusalem, Wagner was writing during the collapse of Jewish life in Germany. Josephus survived by the pen. Wagner was urging his people to remember, resist, and survive through memory and story. The unbroken thread in history. Resist false labels. Preserve sovereignty. In Rome, Josephus' lesson for Israel. Survival and exile. The Israelites faced loss of sovereignty. They were scattered and forced to adapt. But they had to preserve memory. In Nazi Germany, Wagner's lesson. Speaking truth in empire. Rebranded by Nazis as enemy within. He warned of empire. Today's America, the present. Afro-Semites and Indian Semites. They are recasted by the far right. They face deportation and exclusion, but they are rooted in the covenant, old and new. Possible meanings. 1. A statement of historical truth. The artists and publishers may have deliberately chosen to depict Josephus with a Shemitic Afro-Mediterranean look to affirm the Jews of antiquity were not Aryans. Their history, their identity, their look is distinct. And it is theirs. Number 2, a subtle act of resistance. In Nazi Germany, 1935, publishing a Jewish author's work with a cover affirming the non-Aryan Semitic identity of ancient Jews could be read as a quiet rebuttal to racial laws. Instead of trying to blend Jews into Aryan imagery, the cover embraces their authentic heritage. And number 3, Josephus as a mirror. Josephus lived under Roman domination, explaining his people's story to a hostile empire. In 1935, Wagner and his publishers were doing something parallel. presenting the Jewish story in their true colors in a Europe where Jews were being demonized. Yes, I believe the writer and publishers were making a declaration by showing Josephus with an earthy brown Semitic complexion. They highlighted that ancient Jews were not Aryans. Jewish history is old, noble, and Semitic in its roots. Just as Josephus survived Rome by preserving his people's memory, Jews of the 1930s would need to remember who they were in the face of Nazi erasure. It's not just book art. It's cultural resistance through imagery. Josephus, a visual comparison. 3 side-by-side panels. On the left, the first is an Europeanized Josephus, pale skin, Greco-Roman features, flowing beard, styled as he's often shown in 18th and 19th century Western art, represents how Josephus was rebranded in Europe to fit classical ideals. The image in the center, see Walter Hodges' 1935 Josephus from the Jew of Rome cover. Afro-Semitic, deep earthy brown skin, short cropped dark hair, shows how a British artist pushed back against Aryanized depictions, reclaiming Jewish roots in the Levant and Africa. The last image on the right. For today, the image speaks to Afro-Semites and Indian Semites in the Americas, affirming their rightful place in the biblical and historical story of Israel. Josephus, a visual comparison. Starting from the left, the Europeanizing the image of the Jew of Rome, Josephus. In the center, Josephus of Rome, from Walter C. Hodges' cover of the Jew of Rome. From 1935, a bold counter to Nazi ideology. And the last on the right, the reclaiming of Afro-Semitic identity today by Black Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, Haitians, Latino, Latinas, Hispanics throughout the Americas. Furcht Wagner's Dilemma, 1930s. Furcht Wagner was a German Jewish writer in a country turning violently against Jews. By 1933, his books were banned and burned by the Nazis. In 1935, the year of the Jew of Rome, the Nuremberg laws declared Jews outsiders in their own land. Furcht Wagner, like Josephus, was a Jew, explaining Jewish history to a hostile empire. But instead of Rome, it was Hitler's Germany. Why Josephus? Why then? Josephus wrote to justify, defend, and explain Jewish history in the cultural terms of Rome. Fritz Wagner used Josephus to warn modern Jews and Europeans about what happens when empires destroy Jewish sovereignty and identity. By drawing this parallel, Fritz Wagner was saying, we are reliving Josephus's time. The Jewish people again face empire, oppression, and the threat of cultural annihilation. On eBay, Lion Fritz Wagner, The Jew of Rome, first edition, first printing, 1935, with a nice Walter Hodges jacket. In short, The Jew of Rome is Fritz Wagner's allegory for Jewish survival under Nazism. The cover image of Josephus with his authentic Semitic identity is a defiant rejection of Nazi propaganda and a reminder that Jewish history is older, deeper, and nobler than the Aryan myth. There is a powerful parallel and message here. Let me share it in the same frame as Josephus and Fritz Wagner, because their stories echo what Afro-Semites and Indian Semites in the Americas face today. Josephus's lesson, survival in exile. Josephus lived through the loss of sovereignty of Israel. He saw his people scattered, labeled as foreigner in their own homeland, and forced to adapt to Rome's power. His writings preserved memory, identity, and truth, even when empire tried to recast Jews as something else. The message: when empire strips a people of power, they survive by memory, history, and refusing false labels. Fritz Wagner's lesson: speaking truth in empire. In Nazi Germany, Fritz Wagner saw Jews being rebranded, not German, not European, but outsiders. Nazis declared them the enemy within, no matter how loyal, conservative, or integrated they were. His Josephus novel was a warning. Do not let empire rewrite who you are. The message: even when a hostile majority recasts you liberal, radical, outsider, your truth must be spoken back to empire. The present: Afro-Semites and Indian Semites in the Americas. In the U.S., Afro-Semites and Indian Semites face a similar double dislocation. Their identity is recast by far-right narratives, not as conservatives, but as leftists, illegals, or outsiders. Deportation and exclusion policies echo Rome and Nazi Germany. Empire policing who belongs. Like Josephus and Fritz Wagner, you are being told you are not really of us, even though you are rooted in the oldest covenantal story, descendants of Shemitic tribes. The message: your sovereignty lies not in political labels, but in your sacred memory, covenant, and identity. No empire can take that away. The larger parallel: Rome, Nazi Germany, today's America. In each case, Semitic peoples are rebranded by power as traitors, radicals, or aliens, as scapegoats for empires, anxieties. But the survival strategy is the same: preserve identity, refuse false labels, and speak your story into empire. Afro-Semitic, American Indian, Semitic. The Afro-Semitic represent the man on the left, an image of the blacks and Afro-Caribbean, or the southern kingdom of Judah, the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi in the Western Hemisphere, and the woman on the right, who is an American Indian Semitic, representing the northern kingdom of Israel and the Americas, the Latinos and the Latinas, and Native Americans and First Nations of the Americas. The Israelites of Europe, Africa, and Asia, that is a different topic for a different video. The message for Afro-Semites and American Indian Semites today: do not let empire name you. Rome called Josephus a traitor. Nazis called Jews. America may brand you illegal or liberal, but you and your true name is older. Israel. Your memory is your sovereignty. And we are going to continue the conversation concerning the Israelites of Europe. These Israelites lived in Europe before the days of King Solomon. They became prominent in the Roman Empire. They were emperors, senators, gladiators, poets, etc. The racial laws of Europe and Germany were enacted to persecute them. The Black Scots, Black Irish, Black Germans or Dutch, men and women like Beethoven, Goethe, Eric the Red, Queen Elizabeth I, Plato, and Aristotle, Robin Hood and his merry men, and Maid Marian. And let's not forget the legendary King Arthur.